What happens to your body the moment you stand up if gravity suddenly dropped by half? You wouldn't fall. You'd float, just slightly, every single step turning into something closer to a bounce. It sounds thrilling. But the actual physics of living under half of Earth's gravity reveals a world that would be almost unrecognizable, built on entirely different rules for architecture, biology, and the human body itself. Let's start with the number itself, because it matters more than it sounds. Earth's gravity is measured at 9.8 meters per second squared, usually written as 1g. Half that would be 4.9 meters per second squared, or 0.5 g. For context, that's roughly the gravity found on Mars, which sits at about 0.38 g, but slightly stronger, somewhere between Mars and Earth. This isn't a small tweak. It's an entirely different physical environment. The first thing that would change is how you move. Under half gravity, your muscles would suddenly be capable of far more than they were built for. A vertical jump that gets you 50 centimeters off the ground on Earth would launch you roughly a meter under 0.5 g, because the same muscular force now fights against half the resistance. Walking itself would change too. Normal human walking relies on a pendulum-like motion, where gravity pulls your leg back down after each step. With half the gravitational pull, that pendulum swings slower. And at faster walking speeds, your feet would naturally leave the ground more often. You wouldn't walk so much as bound. But this is where the good part ends, because your body wasn't built for this environment. It was built for 1g. And every system inside it calibrated itself to that specific pull. Take your bones. In 2013, NASA funded research on astronauts aboard the International Space Station found that in microgravity, roughly 0g, bone density can decrease by 1 to 1.5% per month, primarily in weight-bearing bones like the hips and spine. This happens because bone is a living tissue that responds to mechanical stress. Specialized cells called osteoblasts build new bone in response to load, and without enough load, that process slows down, while bone breakdown continues at its normal pace. Half gravity wouldn't cause bone loss as severe as zero gravity, since there would still be meaningful load on your skeleton. But the loss would still be significant and ongoing, particularly in a generation that grew up under those conditions and never developed full bone density to begin with. Muscles face a similar problem. The same 2013 NASA research documented muscle atrophy rates of up to 20% in some muscle groups during long-duration spaceflight, especially in the legs, which normally do the most work fighting gravity every single day. Under half gravity, the legs would need to generate only half the force to support body weight, and muscle tissue that isn't regularly stressed doesn't maintain itself. It shrinks. A human born and raised entirely under 0.5 g would likely have visibly thinner legs and a different center of muscle mass than someone raised on Earth, shifting toward upper body strength, since arms would still need meaningful force for tasks like lifting and pushing. The cardiovascular system would change too. Your heart currently works against gravity constantly, pumping blood upward against a 1g pull to keep it circulating to your brain and upper body. Under half that resistance, the heart wouldn't need to work as hard, and heart muscle, like skeletal muscle, adapts to reduced demand by becoming smaller and weaker over time. This is well documented in astronauts, whose cardiovascular systems show measurable deconditioning even after relatively short missions, with some studies showing meaningful reductions in cardiac output within just a few weeks. Now, scale this up to architecture and society, because half gravity would fundamentally rewrite how we build things. Structural engineering is largely a battle against gravity. Buildings need enough structural strength to support their own weight, plus whatever load they carry. Under 0.5 g, the same structural materials could support roughly twice the height before buckling under their own weight, since the force pulling everything downward would be halved. This means skyscrapers could theoretically reach heights that would be structurally impossible on Earth, using the same steel and concrete we use today. Bridges could span longer distances with less support. Buildings could use lighter, thinner materials in general, since less material would be needed to resist a weaker gravitational pull. Transportation would shift dramatically as well. Vehicles designed around wheels gripping a road depend on gravity pressing them downward, providing friction. Under half that force, traditional cars would have significantly less traction, making high-speed travel more dangerous. Vehicles would need to be redesigned, potentially favoring wider tires, lower centers of gravity, or entirely different propulsion methods, less dependent on friction. Even something as basic as sports would transform completely. A baseball, thrown at the same speed, would travel roughly twice as far before gravity pulled it back to the ground. High jump and long jump records would essentially become meaningless under Earth's current framework. The biomechanics of every physical sport would need to be reimagined from scratch, since half gravity doesn't just change how far things travel, it changes how the human body interacts with every physical task. So, if humanity had actually evolved under 0.5 g instead of 1 g, we likely wouldn't have the same skeleton, the same muscle distribution, or the same cardiovascular system we have now. Evolution calibrates itself precisely to the physical constraints of its environment. A species that never needed to fight against a full gravitational pull would likely be taller, more slender, and structurally less dense, since building heavy, gravity-resistant bone and muscle would offer no survival advantage. We didn't evolve under half gravity. We evolved under exactly the pull that built the bones, muscles, and heart you're using right now to read this sentence. Maybe that constant resistance wasn't a limitation. Maybe it was the exact force that built a body strong enough to eventually leave the planet that shaped it.